Now on BBC Two, pause amidst the politics to consider what happens to television on election night.
2 minutes, studio, 2 minutes.
This is going brrrr in my ear. Is that normal? No.
The BBC rehearsing for the general election. As usual, everything that can goes wrong.
Do you not have a hand crank device for the computers if they go down? Can't you hand crank them? Well,
this will be David Dimbleby's 5th appearance in the anchorman's chair.
Or one of the old...
It'll be Jeremy Paxman's first as the politician's principal interrogator.
Good morning, good morning.
Driving the graphics will be Peter Snow, veteran of elections at the BBC and rivals ITN since 1964.
How long is it going to take?
Well, we don't know. We're just doing it for the cameramen. We're just trying to push it together.
Tweaks continue right up to transmission.
We're just adjusting the level to your earpiece.
I just wanted this, if the whole studio is going.
Politicians are not the only ones to have reputations on the line on polling day. For this is the night television goes to war.
May I now introduce my colleagues who are here in the studio.
Good evening and welcome to election night. It's all over at last.
We have the job of presenting them to you and of keeping the wheels turning.
On that basis, if the whole country behaves like that...
Add extra.
I'll be taking you on a walk up the most famous street in the world.
Election night in 1935. Radio days before television.
Behind the scenes in the studio, the announcer came to the microphone at close intervals to put the news on the air. Here are some more election results.
Kingston on 10.
Fathers stayed up to learn if the country was going to be saved or was going on as usual.
Elected.
Robert paused before the conveniently open window and heard that the government was doing nicely.
939.
Sailors at Chatham ignored lights out to listen in.
Conservative.
Theoretically, the Navy has no politics.
20,
but Jack has a strong bias for whatever party puts a bigger Navy prominently in its program. This humble citizen coaxed a cat's whisker and listened in without neglecting to mind his hole in the road, a triumph of citizenship over circumstances.
Then in 1950, Grace Wyndham Goldie, the assistant head of television talks, had a very big idea indeed. The fledgling BBC television service should put on a programme showing the result of every seat, with analysis and interviews. Nothing like it had been tried before, and its launch was quite an occasion.
Mrs. Goldie, how long are you going to be on the air?
Well, we are starting up at 9:15 on polling day. We're going on till 4 in the morning. As you know, results were coming in from up till about 4 o'clock in the morning, and as we feel that this is a service to the public, we shouldn't stop just when we fancy it, but we should go on giving them results while they're still coming out.
Mrs. Goldie's challenge was to fill 17 hours of live unscripted television. She sought the advice of 2 young academics prepared to risk the new medium. Robert Mackenzie was a Canadian lecturing in politics at the London School of Economics. The other was Oxford University's David Butler, the first to study elections in statistical terms, Britain's pioneer psephologist.
26 January 1950. Dear Mr. Butler, we are considering putting out on the evening of February 23rd a short comment. There are, I think, possibilities in television for showing aspects of the election which it is difficult to make clear in sound broadcasting. If we attempted this, we want to be sure that we have expert advice, and so I am venturing to consult you. Yours sincerely, Grace Wyndham Goldie.
Dear Mrs. Wyndham Goldie, I have given some thought to the problem of presenting the election results. If you insist in staying up all night, it's because you are impatient and want, like any sportsman, to spot the winner. This is to help in the game. On balance, the political behaviour of the various regions of Britain is extraordinarily similar. So, if the swing showed by the early results is a great deal more than 4%, we can be fairly sure the Conservatives are on the road to victory.
The suggestion that we were staying up to guess the result in advance, This was against all BBC policy. We were not. We were to interpret the results as they came. And the idea that we would, from the first result, make a guess at the final outcome, that was naughty, improper.
David Butler had discovered swing. From the percentage change of votes in just a few seats, he made a prediction as to who would win the election. From then on, prediction was the game on each successive election night, and finding ways of putting swing into pictures spawned 1,000 visual aids. But the graphics have sometimes been a mixed blessing.
Very few of these gimmicks actually worked. They took an enormous number of man-hours playing around with them, then putting them up rather belatedly in front of a camera and finding that they were not intellectually comprehensible to Mrs. Bloggs down the road.
At Alexandra Palace, studios A and B had been taken over by the election team.
In the early days, graphics were confined to simple cardboard and ink captions.
It took about 45 seconds to get from having some figures in front of you to painting them on the screen, letting the screen dry, and then putting them up in front of the camera. That 45 seconds was crucial because in 45 seconds, chaps with slide rules could work out what the percentages were. It took almost all of 45 seconds to get them to work it out, to write it down, pass the slip of paper across to me. And the thing that made my name was we got the first result, and I would say...
If the whole country behaves like that, a swing of between 2 and 2.5%, the Conservatives will have a lead over Labour at the end when all the results are in, if the whole country behaves like that, of about 120 seats clear over Labour.
Dear David, I must say how much I admire this recurring tour de force of yours. We have been inundated with letters of congratulation. There is also a hint there that the ladies in the audience found you particularly impressive. Yours sincerely, Grace.
All that remain of David Butler's early successes are discreet notes in the Radio Times.
Her Majesty had summoned Sir Anthony to an audience.
May 1955.
Sir Anthony came out to his first public appearance as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, as well as Foreign Secretary.
Sir Anthony Eden, who just replaced Winston Churchill as Tory leader, called a snap election. He won with a 58-seat majority, and television coverage came of age. That night, Mrs. Goldie presented an anchorman who could hold together the whole 17 hours.
30 minutes ago, the polling stations closed and voting in the general election ended.
Richard Dimbleby.
I thought he was rather puddingy as I knew him from the outside, never having met him. But once I got to know him, I became enormously fond of him, enormously impressed by him. His sheer professionalism all the way through was there.
It's one fact from all this, to me as the perennial layman, there is a Conservative government. It has a majority of at least 50.
He would play, I am the stupid common man and you're too clever by half academics.
Is that what's called being a psephologist? I've heard that word used about you. I gather it's rather a controversial word.
When the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, voted in Athens, they dropped a pebble in the urn, and they called it a psephos. And so there is this word psephology, P-S-E-P-H-O-L-O-G-Y, like psychology with E-P instead of Y-C.
Psephologist today, Salford, I think, is ready with another result. We go straight London to Salford.
He did with extreme charm and good manners, and I felt a sense of total security.
We bring to an end this marathon run after some 17 hours with a very simple and easy word. Goodbye.
But that cosy world was ripped apart. In 1955, ITN hit the air, and its effect was startling. Within weeks, it had snatched 80% of the audience.
We felt that we were television news, and that meant that we had an elan and a vitality which went hand in hand with very high technical quality.
For the honour of the corporation, Grace Wyndham Goldie went to war, and she chose as her battleground the '59 general election.
Memo from the Assistant Head of Talks, Television Service. On this occasion, we are faced with something new, i.e. competition. And we have heard that ITN are treating it as a major occasion when they propose to challenge the BBC in its coverage of a national event. I gather from them that all the programme companies are lending all their resources and that unlimited money is going to be made available. Under these circumstances, we must take this challenge very seriously.
I was well aware that this was the great head-on test.
Yes, the election's well into its stride. So it seems is Mr. Macmillan.
A close contest was forecast. Harold Macmillan, on one side, sought a third straight Conservative victory with the slogan, "You never had it so good." Against him was Hugh Gaitskell, the Labour leader. In an age before exit polls, both sides could be confident of victory.
It's right in the front line.
Geoffrey Cox was on edge when he arrived at ITN's headquarters on polling day. He knew he couldn't match the BBC for big guns, but he hoped to beat it with style and gadgetry.
As the studio floor manager was calling in a 1 minute to transmission, Geoffrey went up to a very nervous Ian Trethowne, who was settling his tie and going like this, and said to Ian, "I just want you to know, Ian, the whole future of ITV is on your shoulders tonight." and they said, 30 seconds.
ITN had reason to worry. A few hours before transmission, a massive technical flaw came to light. The results captions were illegible to the viewer.
I had the unhappy experience of knowing before we were even on the air that something was going to go wrong with us because our captions were inadequate.
Worthing, no change in a Conservative seat. Sir Otho Prior Palmer, Conservative, 31,396. F.R. Mason, Labour, 7,618.
Although I took expert advice and all sorts of pundits examined it and said yes, it would work, in practice on the night it looked grubby and meagre, and we lost authority as a result of it. I was heartbroken, and that's why I turned to pearl my atom bomb at the BBC and bring up my computer.
Good evening. Brian Inglis here, speaking from Stafford. I'd like you to meet Deuce, the celebrated English electronic computer. Now, Deuce can perfectly well speak for himself, I hope, through this cathode ray tube. Let's see if he does. He doesn't. It's the second time he's been obstinate today. I hope it'll work rather better later.
It was absolutely agonizing. All the impact had gone. That magical moment that I'd relied on having our viewers stand by was thrown away.
The BBC was triumphant. It established a lead in audience share which it has never lost, and set a blueprint for a programme that has barely changed.
The Birmingham Mail. The commercial service trialled in skill, experience, personality and know-how. ITV wore L plates.
My job, aided by my friends here with their slide rules, to try and explain as clearly as I can which way the wind is blowing.
The Daily Sketch. Slick, quick BBC is winning. Forget all those sneers about Auntie BBC. The BBC is leading the way.
I'll be looking at the effect on the parties and leading personalities of what we're showing in these results.
Het Friarfolk Holland. The threesome of Dimbleby, Butler and Mackenzie gave the greatest performance ever achieved in any European country. Commercial TV failed completely.
I did say in a brief 1 minute piece in BBC television last night, if you want to see the fullest and the fastest results of this election, watch BBC television. And do you know, I was right.
The television cameras here, will you say something?
As Harold Macmillan cruised to a 100-seat majority, there was some consolation for ITN. Its instinct for news placed a camera at the right place at just the right time.
I think that in view of the results that have come in, it is clear that there is going to be a Conservative government, and I must concede, therefore, victory in this election to our opponents.
Here was TV being used for the first time to communicate to the public a major political decision. In the past, such concessions would have been made from the party headquarters the next day, the press would have been called, interviews would have been given, and here, direct to the viewers, not through any party machinery or anything, came this moment of concession. And of course, it was a great human moment, because Gateshill had thought he was going to win.
Good evening. We've just heard that the first vote has been counted at Gateshead, and it's a fairly sensational vote. It's for Labour. Now, if this pattern is repeated throughout the country, this will result in Labour getting 34,675,000 votes. Conservatives, nil.
In 1964, few gave Tory Prime Minister Alec Douglas-Home a chance.
Well, it's very nice of you all to come out. It's not a very convenient time of day. We've got so much time to cover.
The old Etonian was expected to crumple before the challenge of the brilliant, classless new Labour leader.
It's been a wonderful meeting this afternoon. Now you all know what you've got to do. So go to it, and the best of luck. God bless.
Harold Wilson dominated the 1964 election. It was the beginning of an uneasy relationship with the BBC, although in these early days his fire was directed at an unlikely target.
On the eve of the election, he asked the Director General to move Steptoe and Son, which played in peak time on Thursday, polling night, and the Director General considered that, and he came to the conclusion that a program that was attracting audiences of 14 million should be moved to a time after the polls had closed, in order that everybody had the chance to go out and vote.
This time, ITN was ready. Election day also saw Khrushchev toppled in Russia, and Cox had found a new presenter who could cope with that and more.
Well, whatever may be happening in Russia tonight, and the latest news suggests it could be something big. Within minutes, we shall have a pointer to who's going to govern Britain for maybe the next 5 years.
I decided that we should gamble on Alistair Burnett. Now, Burnett had never dealt with a major program, and as you know, the anchorman of a major program like this is in the position of a railway signaller in a system that's gone mad.
Let's go over the Pennines now, from Salford on the suburbs of Manchester, or Manchester on the suburbs of Salford, to that other city up there in the north, to Leeds. Let's see how they're getting on in Yorkshire.
Alistair was an astonishing performer on the air. I mean, I never saw him look at a note. Alistair would sit there and a result would come in. And of course, in the old days, results used to come in a sort of basket. And you had this basket of paper, and you'd put your hand out to your left, and you would take this, rather like putting your hand in a basket of crabs.
And we now have a swing from our computer, which says that the Labour Party is now likely to have a majority of 57 in the House of Commons on the basis of this Cheltenham result.
And you would then have to interpret it. Now, Alistair did that straight off the top of his head. Absolute genius he was at the immediate reaction.
So with Exeter there...
Alongside, or rather underpinning Burnett, was a gimmick to give the programme that much sought-after immediacy.
And this is the programme with the miracle new ingredient.
We at times referred to it as the Manhattan Project, which was the code name, of course, given by the Americans for the development of the atom bomb.
Well, you'll see the state of the parties instantly on our seat counter right down there. It'll keep you bang up to date on the parties second by second. The score now, it won't be any surprise to you, is in fact love all. But there are 630 seats to go.
My first action on that night, on the night of the general election in 1964, was to watch the bottom of the BBC screen. I wasn't interested in what was happening on the top of it. And when I saw that they didn't come up with this, I knew that this time the gods were on our side.
Absolutely, there's no doubt. There was a great coup for them. It took a little while for the Captain boys to come up with the same thing. We didn't miss with it in 1966. No doubt.
I'd be very pleased.
The strip was to prove invaluable in an astonishingly close election, as Wilson took 2 days to crawl to a 4-seat majority.
Well, do you feel like a Prime Minister?
Quite honestly, I feel like a drink.
This time it was the BBC that was in turmoil.
Memo from Paul Fox. Quite frankly, our news input was not good enough. On the ITV results comparison, we don't even break even. The situation was chaotic.
We have a Labour gain in the north, and I can't identify it for the moment. Labour gain in the north. Who's this? And none of us can recognise the picture on the caption, so you'll just have to wait until we can tell you who it is.
I think I ought to say to begin with that the theory of swing is taking a bit of a battering in some ways tonight.
Butler looked like a man who saw his whole swing principle go up in smoke around him.
The only new gimmick on display was neither political nor correct.
We have in the background large numbers of the girls all wearing terracotta overalls, poor little things. Who can we give you for a start? There's Miriam Cork sitting down the end there, who didn't really know you were going to look at her, and she's being very discreet and modest. There are charming girls on telephones, as if she didn't know she was being looked at.
Yet the corporation did boast one innovation. A failed parliamentary candidate recently poached from ITN.
Thank you, Mr. Day. I hope when you next interview me, you don't interrupt quite so often.
I hope you don't take it personally.
Not a bit, Mr. Day. I like you immensely, but you must understand the rules by which we do this.
May I call you brother?
If you wish, I will be very flattered and delighted.
Goodbye, Mr. Brown.
Goodbye, Brother Day.
I mean, you didn't get much humour from David Butler or Robert Mackenzie. You got very authoritative, rather dry, psephological analysis. I never understood psephology because I was not interested in percentages, but only in principles. And therefore I liked all the fun I could get, but I didn't set out to be a comedian, although it always has been my secret ambition to be a musical comedian.
Television press office.
Robin Day is bullying and bad-tempered.
How much longer is your organization going to allow the public to be affronted by seeing and hearing this man insulting his betters?
I didn't give a damn what people thought because I just had to do my job. And the nuts who ring up on the night and complain or praise are really neither here nor there.
Now, we have, in addition...
But for some, the mood at the BBC that night was sombre. Richard Dimbleby knew that he didn't have long to live.
He knew it would be his last election results programme. He knew how ill he was, and one or two of us knew that he was ill, and also realised that even though this was a tight election and that another election would be on again within 2 years, we knew that this was Richard's last programme. Last election results program, and when he looked round the studio, the election studio, on Friday tea time, it was quite a moment.
Oh, we just heard the result of one of the marginal seats here, Omsk Southeast. Fyodor Brunitsyn, Soviet Communist Party, 14. Patrick O'Brien, Ulster Unionists, 22. Well, that's a bit of an upset in Omsk, isn't it? The Ulster Unionist is in and Brunitsyn's out. Wait a minute, Brunitsyn has demanded a recount. What do you think about that, Tom?
Well, that's certainly a surprise in Omsk. Of course, it was the third candidate, the Liberal, who made all the early running and was well ahead in the opinion polls, but he hasn't been seen since Monday.
When Harold Wilson went to the country in 1966, the BBC was on the hunt for a new anchorman. Robin Day was rejected for being too grumpy, Ian Trethowan, the political editor, for being too boring. Instead, Paul Fox chose a figure known for his joviality rather than his journalism.
Cliff was and is a professional anchorman, and it takes a great deal of nous, nerve, and dedication to be a professional anchorman.
There's a news flash. Just a moment. Let's see what it is. Here it comes. And that little dot comes. It usually... Ooh, it's gone and we've missed it. Have we?
He could hold a programme together and convey a sense of occasion to the audience.
Mitchell Moore's jaunty style seemed at odds with the occasion.
Good morning.
Labour secured an easy victory, and by the second day, the new anchorman was running out of jaunty things to say.
Good morning. I hope there's somebody there, because we're all here again. I tell you, it doesn't seem long ago since last we were here either. I have made the most startling discovery. There is a bird which sits in the middle of the television centre at White City and sings its head off from 4 o'clock until 6. It was my boon companion for our 2 brief, fleeting hours of rest.
The second day was awful. The second day was always awful because you were waiting those interminable hours for people in Ross and Cromarty to start counting the crosses, by which time you knew what was happening in general. And so the overall excitement was gone. And you had somehow to sort of blow on the few remaining embers that there were to get a bit of flame, get a lick of flame going on day 2.
So Paul Fox planned a surprise.
I was certainly enraptured by the fact that Friday morning would be enlivened by doing an interview with Wilson coming on the train from Liverpool to London. No live interview had ever been done from a train. Well, it had to be kept quiet from ITN, above all. I don't think ITN could have done it. Oh, absolutely, it was done in some secrecy.
At enormous expense, the BBC had fitted out a carriage with the latest live video equipment.
I was very worried by the competition on the train. You didn't have to mount an espionage operation. Just the information somehow reached us.
So Cox sneaked his own camera team on board with an old-fashioned film camera.
We came to whatever time it was, 11 o'clock in the morning. Wilson in his compartment, the BBC team just down the corridor. In walked John Morgan with the camera team.
Well, the Prime Minister's on the train with his entourage, his secretaries, his family, his friends. And he's been reading the papers, and he looks in very good mood. He looked very buoyant this morning, even though he only had about 3 hours sleep last night. But he doesn't wish to speak to me on the train today. He refuses to, in fact.
What made it worse, in the wake of John Morgan came John Whale, representing ITN with a film camera, and Wilson said, oh yes, I'll do the interview for ITN, but I don't want to do one for the BBC.
Prime Minister, how are you feeling after 3 days and 3 weeks of campaigning?
This morning I'm feeling, I think, as very many other people are, I suspect yourself, who stayed up to watch the results, a little short of sleep, but we can soon make that up. Otherwise, my voice is a little rusty.
Is that as a result of...
To get the film back to the studio, ITN simply threw it out the window to a waiting car. It was a huge scoop.
And now, from what I believe is the first recorded interview in a train back to the studio in London.
Pleased to see that you can travel on British Railways, second class, first class, and ITN class. And see the Prime Minister travelling ITN.
The deliberate insult was clear.
Here is the result for Leicester. Arthur J. Smith.
Sensible party.
30,612. Jethro Q. Walrus Titty.
Silly party.
32,108.
Well, there's the first result, and the silly party have held Leicester. What do you make of that, Norman?
Well, this is largely as I predicted, except that the silly party won.
Well, if I may, I think the interesting thing here is the big swing to the silly party, and of course, the very large swing back to the sensible party had a tendency to wobble up and down in the middle because the screw's loose.
I can't add anything to that. Colin?
I'm afraid I can't think of anything.
In 1970, everyone feared a dull election, so the BBC's new editor resorted to a familiar tactic. But he'd also found something shiny and new, a computer.
BBC TV's coverage of the election 70 results will be a generation ahead of 66. No longer merely a prestigious slide rule for predictions, the main computer this time is required to drive the whole operation.
The BBC set out to crush ITN with a combination of technical muscle and sheer size.
I think all the sets were awesome. They always used to sort of challenge you. And these sets sometimes it was like being on the bridge of the QE2. Enormous, and everyone's down below you and people above you and on your shoulders. I mean, it was quite bizarre.
We were sort of Celtic miniatures by comparison, you know. I think it puts a heck of a lot of extra burden on the producer in the gallery to have to sort of take in all these things.
In the end, it's all reduced to a screen that big, isn't it? You know, there you are, framed in this screen. Doesn't matter how big the set is. I mean, you can see people running around it, but I don't think people are impressed by the size of the sets.
Take a look at what the opinion polls had to say finally about the prospects as they saw them. Frankly, they were all over the place, and quite possibly...
But one BBC gimmick that night did change the whole face of election analysis. All the polls, bar one, pointed to a massive Labour victory. Then, in secret, the BBC prepared another.
It was very, very hugger-mugger, because we didn't want ITN, ITV, to know that this was happening and this was going on. They, I think an outside firm did it, but they were sort of sworn to secrecy that this was going to happen. And, oh yes, very secretive about the whole thing. In fact, I don't think I knew about it until the day before the election.
Now we're going to try something entirely new. We're going to try and predict the first result by a new and admittedly untried method.
It was the first exit poll. Voters leaving the polling booths were asked where they'd put their crosses. It suggested a startling Conservative win.
We hadn't allowed for a 9.1% swing to the Conservatives.
That is a very high swing.
The most startling election since the war. We really had a rather spectacular achievement on this occasion.
They're even having to extend his swingometer. Let's see him doing it. There he is.
Well,
He's
it's rather
having
like
to paint
painting the Sistine Chapel here. We're bringing the swingometer up to date to make room for the kind of swings. There have been several, around 9% to the Conservatives.
It had an enormous effect on Bob Mackenzie, who became even more attached to the swingometer because of all the comments he got afterwards, and he made some very amusing remarks about it as he stood by this makeshift extension.
It still points to a Conservative majority.
It was one of the BBC team's proudest moments.
Here now are two very distinguished politicians whose names for the moment escape me. They represent the two main parties, and they will be discussing some of the outstanding achievements of British politics during the last 10 years. Thank you.
February 1974, disillusion with politics was spreading. Prime Minister Ted Heath asked the question, who governs Britain? Not you, concluded a country suffering strikes and power cuts. Conservative discontent found focus around Enoch Powell. Fiercely opposed to his party's policy on Europe, he dramatically urged his supporters to vote Labour.
Judas was paid. Judas was paid. I am making a sacrifice. Enoch,
Enoch, Enoch. Heath was out. There was a hung parliament and a seesaw election that defied interpretation by the academics.
I can't project. Remember last time I said, if the whole country behaves like Guildford, then Mr. Heath will be back with an appreciably increased majority. On this, I have to say, if the whole country behaves like this, we've got to wait for a lot more results.
I rang from the control room our academic on the screen, on the platform, and I said, can you tell us who's winning? You know, with all this deluge stuff, and he phoned me back and he said, I can't tell you who's winning, I can only tell you who's not losing. Well, for a newsman trying to look for headlines, that didn't work, and that was a turning point in ITN general elections, and I determined from that point on we wouldn't go anymore with academics.
ITN went into the second election of 1974 with new faces in the studio. And in place of academics, there was a machine to change the look of election coverage forever.
And a great colleague of mine spotted a machine which was used to devise knitting patterns before actually committing them to a sample. And it therefore could do all kinds of little columns and patterns and things. We said, oh, that we could make that into a map and put and that's how it started.
Now, Peter Snow has a visual computer which will be playing a prominent part in our results programme.
Well, let's have a very quick look at the way the country is going. Let's bring in the gains. Here they come. Here are the gains. Only one Conservative gain. There are all the Labour gains changing into the Labour colours. It was magic and very exciting to see within seconds of the vote being announced the ups and downs, the changes for Conservative, Labour and the Liberals and the others and so on of the share of the vote compared with the last election, and they went, these little blocks went up and down. Again, it seems absurd to think that was clever once, but it was, it was real breakthrough. I'll just see if we can get a forecast for the whole country. Oh, there it is, yes, that's fantastic. There is a forecast for the whole country.
ITN had the edge with more than computer graphics that night. Its exit poll showed a very different result from the BBC's.
Certainly, if our forecast on this poll is right, it could be Labour by a whisker.
This Harris poll is talking about a 5% swing to Labour, which would give them something like a 100-seat overall majority.
Once the first results came in, the BBC had to downgrade its forecast rapidly.
That was only about a 1.2% swing, which was just a little less than the Labour Party need for a clear majority.
And downgrade again.
It's much more wide open than we've been implying up to now.
To settle eventually at 3. The error caused consternation among the great ones at the corporation.
Memorandum from the Chief Secretary, subject board meeting, confidential. The chairman expressed serious reservations about the straw poll. Its results had been an embarrassment, and he personally found the idea of conducting such a poll unseemly. It was his strong recommendation that there should be no such straw polls in future.
Those negative views expressed are rather remind me of the views expressed about whether we should do this sort of programme at all that were said in 1950. There were people who just thought you shouldn't do this. Once the polls have closed, it is something, it is a news story, there is evidence, people have collected evidence about how people behaved on the day, and it's wrong for any organisation to deny that knowledge to a mass public.
And while ITN used its resources to capture the spontaneity of the night, the BBC seems stagey and extravagant. This broadcast lasted less than 2 minutes, but cost the equivalent of £300,000 in today's terms. That sent the governors scurrying to their dictaphones again.
The chairman drew attention to the evidence that the television service had been over-elaborate in its results programme. Mrs. Clark said that many people would have spotted signs of waste. Lord Feather favoured getting rid of the swingometer and what he called all the other examples of bogus scientific rubbish. Mr. Fuller described the whole exercise as a late Roman Empire symptom of decadence.
The Russians said that I was an iron lady. They were right.
The wave up there
In 1979, Margaret Thatcher's campaigning crusade swept the nation. On polling night, the BBC bosses entertained their election team to dinner.
All the great and the good from the BBC, the presenter, David Dimbleby, controller BBC 1, controller BBC 2, Alistair Milne, all there for this feast, which I remember it was steak, and I can remember now seeing David Butler and Bob Mackenzie, a glass of claret in hand. I couldn't eat a thing or touch a drop. I couldn't get out of there quick enough and back to my little hidey hole behind the gallery.
Back in the studio control room, John Morell's nerves went from bad to worse.
When the red light went on that night in '79, 2 minutes before airtime, I would have loved to have been anywhere except in that gallery. Running through my mind was a feeling that if only I ran a green grocery store.
The BBC went on the air with a touch of the jitters. However, it had found an anchorman who knew he could carry the mantle of Richard Dimbleby.
Good evening. Well, it looks like being one of the most exciting election nights ever, with the possibility of a very close result and the prospect of Britain having its first woman Prime Minister at the end of the night.
We'd gone really well in the first hour. Everything was going smoothly. All our outside broadcasts were geared up, were fired up. Everybody was ready for, effectively, the pictures from the first count.
Never until then had either side missed the first result.
We have to go to Glasgow Central for a result.
But whilst ITN was showing this, the BBC could only offer this.
No great surprise there, of course. That's an absolutely safe Labour seat. The interesting thing, I think, of course, is that the Conservatives came into second place. Farouk Salim,
all at one time. There had to be a number of us trying to talk to you all at one time.
Calamity. My whole world came to an abrupt full stop.
Rejoicing. Rejoicing. I mean, the word went round. They missed the first result.
BBC, you're through Putting you through now.
You're missing the results by talking too much. Haven't you got too many people
Let's do without all this jabbering. Get on with giving the results.
I prefer watching BBC programmes, but I think it is disgusting and deplorable when they cannot actually be there when the forced results
Get up with all this chat. We want to see results. Putting you through.
A third of my brain, I'm sure, was filled with this catastrophe, this calamity. Two-thirds then had to keep going. You know, there was a lot of live television going on here, and therefore the two-thirds gradually spread to the rest of the brain until the heartbeat had gone back to normal, and I was totally in control.
As Prime Minister Jim Callaghan arrived in Cardiff for his count, the night stretched ahead for the BBC.
The Prime Minister is meant to come here. He was meant to have a celebratory drink with the Mayor, with the Lord Mayor, but of course the Prime Minister doesn't drink.
If you turn round, Richard, towards us, we'll be able to see you too.
Don't know which camera you're looking at me with.
That's the one. That's the one.
They're hoping that he's coming up the corridor now. This is an area which has a lot of statues of famous Welsh people, including Owen Glendower, David Lloyd George, Boadicea.
Putting you through now. Just one moment, please.
You are gloating over a Conservative victory. Fair presentation is needed.
For the national picture, let's go back to David.
I've been caught with the traditional sandwich. Like father, like son.
This is a city hall with many corridors. Most of them have been locked off, partly by the security people here, and it's conceivable that the Prime Minister may have chosen to come and make a rather undignified entrance through a back passage which would take
I
him
must
through the
complain
side
with utter disgust at some of the comments made. It is absolutely disgusting.
Overnight, Mrs. Thatcher has broken the sound barrier for women, as it were, and that will be the world news, assuming she goes to the palace tomorrow.
I've seen the trends, just like you intelligent commentators have. I shall have something more to say when it's entirely clear, and I'll say it in London.
Your programme is a pleasure to watch. Please thank Robin Day and David Dimbleby.
And on the second day, as the new Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, left the palace, there was one more cruel blow to come.
It was our view that we could carry the children's programme and be at Downing Street back live well in time to see Mrs. Thatcher. So all we would be losing would be a motor car journey.
A house with a door. 1, 2, 3. Ready to play. What's the day?
Then you had the picture of the first woman Prime Minister to cross the threshold of number 10. And I couldn't believe at double viewing, the BBC had a F test card on BBC 2 and a cartoon on BBC 1, and they missed the shot.
There's an old lady with a broom. She wants to sweep away some cobwebs.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
I was watching the ITN monitor, and they were still on air. And as soon as I saw their pictures, I thought we've blown this.
I believe that for a long, long time, I've heard since that members of the Thatcher camp thought that was some deliberate snub by the BBC.
It was a bad mistake. A really bad mistake.
Sorry, Bob was standing...
At least Robert Mackenzie could muster the last triumph for cardboard over computer.
Nothing will keep him away from it.
Absolutely fascinating story. This is the 8th appearance of the swingometer. Now, you may remember my saying at the beginning of the evening, Mrs. Thatcher needs 4.5% swing to get somewhere between 5 and 35 majority. I said around 20. The marvelous computer worked it all out and got her up to 60 majority and all that kind of thing. The last word of the computer is, it is a 4.5% swing to Mrs. Thatcher and about 25-seat majority. It was right here from the beginning. Cost a lot more to work it out in the computer. The old machine is still there.
Mackenzie was to die before the next election. It was also to be David Butler's last appearance on the programme.
Bob and I just happened to be lucky in the time we were around, and we were typecast into things that fitted in with the matters we were pursuing academically. We were able to communicate some of this to a wider public.
This is BBC One.
In the 1980s, television embraced the age of the satellite and microchip. The programmes gathered pace. There was no longer any need for cardboard swingometers or academics rattling off statistics to fill up the dead minutes. Time was spent instead on pictures of more people and events than Grace Wyndham Goldie might dare to dream back in 1950.
This technology is at our service. What matters is the story and the people and the looks on the faces and the excitement and the feeling at Tory Party and Labour Party headquarters. You can spend more time on the people, the characters, the places, and we certainly go to far more places than we did 20 years ago.
So after 33 years as a Bristol MP, Tony Benn is out of the House of Commons.
The people have been defeated who didn't expect it. All those things are what make it work and make it sort of interesting. I mean, it's a human experience. It's not a mathematical programme.
To illustrate this human experience, the BBC had poached Peter Snow to preside over a dynasty of ever more complex graphics.
Elections like war, they get the latest and the highest and the fastest and always the most expensive kinds of toys you can go out and buy, as it were, from the kind of technological equivalent of curries. And so all these things are parked about the place, and they'll all do wonderful things.
We are looking through the graphics all the time and saying, there's a good one, look at that, ooh, look at the share in the north. So we say, I know what, let's give him, okay, national map, flash the gains, and then share in the north, right? Okay, you ring up the editor of the programme. Go away, I'm far too busy, I've got 6 OBs coming up. Well, what do you want then? Well, offer me something else. Okay, so we then look at the graphics and, yes, that makes a good one, but sell him that. And then we get it again. All right, give it to me now. I'm not ready yet, because we haven't programmed the graphics. We haven't put them together. So it's absolutely frantic.
In 1983, ITN couldn't depict the Thatcher victory in the graphic splendour of the BBC, but Nicholas could still use different technology to pull off a coup.
A camera was located in front of Mrs. Thatcher, and then the lead ran underneath the car up to a little transmitter on the rear fender, and then he went up to a helicopter and down into the studio.
We did see, which caused a certain amount of alarm, we did see their amazing camera in Mrs. Thatcher's car, which was very smart.
We have Mrs. Thatcher in her car now, on her way back to London.
My ITN reporters described in joyous terms, as the car sped off, and all the cameras were covering her there, the looks on the BBC's faces as they saw this van going behind, and they said, what's that for? And they said, oh, the camera in the car. They said, what?
Well, I wouldn't have it as a magnificent success. It didn't change the nature of the story. It changed the picture. It didn't do a lot for the kind of understanding of who was going to be the government the next day, apart from being able to look at a rather distorted Mrs. Thatcher in her Jaguar.
Who has the will? Who has the drive? Who's going to bring this old country alive?
Maggie Thatcher.
I do that every Tuesday and Thursday.
It wasn't hard to forecast a Conservative win in '83, and the BBC's prediction of the landslide was spot on.
If our figures are right, she's going to have a landslide with a majority of about 146 over all other parties in the new House of Commons.
It's Maggie for me.
It was all very different in 1987.
Have you heard the exit poll projection of 68 seats?
ITN at least predicted a substantial Thatcher victory.
I did hear it, but I've rather wait another 12 hours to see the result of the real poll.
But the BBC suggested she might even lose her overall majority. Neil Kinnock's attitude that night was based on that BBC prediction.
Great.
Neil, do you think that you'll stand a better chance here than you will nationally?
No, we're going to do well here, and we're going to do well right across Britain.
The exit poll's failure was a gift for BBC betas.
Mr. Dimbleby, there's no point in going on in trying to prophesy what will happen. I don't believe in crystal balls, and I do just remember that your own wasn't very good on election night.
Politicians had terrific fun with it and used it to sort of tease the BBC and say,
The poor old sad anti-BBC, where everybody's sad, but not here on ITV, where it's all jollity, gaiety and party time, because, of course, we don't have...
We didn't let the gin and tonic industry down, although Alistair was a devotee of the Highland syrup. He would have a drink, yes, we used to give him, like chancellors, you know, chancellors of the Exchequer have something on the front bench when they're delivering a budget. Yes, he would have a whiskey and water available from time to time, which he took in all moderation, of course.
Of course, it's not just the BBC that has all that swanky high-tech equipment here at ITN. We have our own up-to-the-minute technology to predict the results.
After 1987, both Burnett and Nicholas stepped down from a tenacious battle against the BBC's vast resources. At times, they had nearly caught the BBC in the ratings. That brings us to 1992. This time the BBC started with the big names and most of the viewers. To take care of the exit poll, the Director General himself had even set up a special committee. But again there was trouble. All through the day the poll had pointed to Labour as the largest party. Then, as the audience watched this, there was a sudden rush of new information.
As I said good evening at 5 to 10 when the programme started, looking up above me was this huge picture of Neil Kinnock and a thing saying Kinnock narrow majority. Then they said to me, forget that, wait till we give you more information. And then I began the programme and I still didn't know what we were going to say, and I knew that as Big Ben struck 10, I had to come out with our exit poll pronouncement. I couldn't say, and our exit poll says, we're not quite sure actually who's won this election. We had to say something. And I got up onto the podium that I was working from, and it wasn't until I got up there and looked over my shoulder at the big screen that I saw what the result was going to be, and they told me at the same time. 10 o'clock, and our view is it's going to be a hung parliament. This election is too close to call.
For once, both BBC and ITN polls were in agreement.
Don't forget, watch that swingometer. If it goes that way, it's Kinnock. That way, it's Major. If it goes that way, it's Paddy Ashdown. Now, back to Mission Control and David.
Rory Bremner.
But the joke was soon on both BBC and ITN as the result from the first marginal seat, Basildon, was announced.
David Anthony Andrew Amos, Conservative, 24,159.
If Basildon is typical, then wait for much, much, much less swing than the exit poll earlier was suggesting, but very, very early results yet.
Let me just read those back. Conservative, 5760.
Got a result for Glasgow Cathcart.
Is that Leighton and Wanstead?
Come on, let's see it. Torbay. Gone bananas. Gone completely insane. Hang on a minute.
This time, of course, there'll be no such mistakes. Rehearsals are all about avoiding errors.
I think this set is back to 59, the election when they had all the girls in pinafores walking around in a procession at the beginning.
At the moment we've got a slight crash here. We have the most brilliant programmer in the world who is trying to get it to work, but it won't. And I hope this doesn't happen on the night, You see he's flashing around his little mouse on the screen at the moment, trying to make it work. Here we are looking at the Labour targets in the south, but they're not right, are they? No, Lib Dem, oh, maybe they are.
Are you ready to drink hemlock, Mr. Portillo?
Jeremy Paxman will step into Robin Day's role.
But are you, I mean, the game is up, you accept that?
What I do think is great about times of election is that you can't equivocate. I mean, when the people speak, you can't muck around and pretend that a defeat is a victory, which is the sort of whopper that politicians spend a lot of time telling in other circumstances. So, I mean, actually, there is a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and the room for equivocation is much, much less than it is at other times when you're just required to flannel around about what a policy is or isn't.
Snow next. And cut.
Starting with Plymouth, Sutton and Exeter. There they go. Labour knocking these blue blocks away completely.
And there will, of course, be a handful of new gimmicks, some designed quite literally to blow away the opposition. Lacking the BBC's resources, ITN has had to use the local elections for its rehearsal. For an anchorman, it's looked outside the organisation, but not outside the family.
Welcome back. Tonight in Election 96 we're trying to paint the clearest and the most accurate picture available of the state of the parties in British politics. Tonight's English Council... I'm not totally unaware of the tradition. I seem to remember that Dimbleby's, my father and David have been doing it since general elections started. I've been involved in the run-up to elections for quite a long time. This is the first time I've done it on the night. Aware of the weight of it? I think it's a nice tree under which to nestle.
Tony Blair would enjoy a majority of 177. The Conservative Party reduced in effect to a rump.
Alistair Stewart will take on Peter Snow with the graphics.
Good night for them.
Hang on.
13 remaining...
Alistair, apparently you skipped a graphic.
No, Jonathan did. He keeps skipping the change.
Yeah, but listen, it's your job to keep up. We don't need to know that. You wouldn't be able to change that in a live show, so just get on with it.
I'm a presenter, not a sodding juggler.
It makes that so much more interesting.
I think the core difference is that we rely a lot more on the spoken word and less on the gizmos and the complicated graphics, you know, maps of the United Kingdom that go up and down and steps to defeat for various members of Parliament and members of the Cabinet and what have you. I think the interchange conversationally between Jonathan, myself and Michael and the psephologists is probably a key difference.
May the 1st next year.
And the academics are back. There's a whole panel of them. 46 years on, one's particularly familiar.
Well, it's just nice to be working, in fact. It's exciting to be in a studio on election night, having a job to do, trying to interpret the figures as fast as one can as they come in. And in that, there's no real difference. We're having the same data in the ITN as one had in the BBC.
In the so-called contest of Dimble A and Dimble B, Jonathan gives nothing away about competing against David.
Will I be? That's the first time I've ever thought of it.
Swing, 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 swing. The moment you go forecast, you've then got those super target, like the West Midlands.
Didn't come naturally. There's this shot which gives...
Those who monitor impartiality in broadcasting might take note. It matters less to the BBC and ITN whether it's Labour or Conservative on the night than who wins the votes of the viewers after 17 hours of non-stop head-to-head competition.
We always beat them anyway. That was a cut for you, so I'm going to have my lunch.
The country faces a clear choice on May the 1st. Another 18 hours looking at bar charts,
or me and a lot of comedians giving you the results and doing jokes?
Here's Peter Snow performing at Docklands in front of 250,000 fans. We will have Valerie Singleton and a bouncy House of Commons.
Really must remember to watch.
We'll also be joined by Alan Partridge, live music, a scandal in a helicopter, stunning guests and a clairvoyant Japanese tourist.
Did you know there was an election on?
Right. The celebrations start when the polls close with Have I Got News For You at 10, followed by the election night armistice live for 3 hours of comedy and results from 10:30.
BBC Two.